Good evening. Dobry wieczór. Arab Tov. My name is Adam Singer, and I'm the president of Calgary Jewish Federation. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this evening's program with our very special guest, Eli Rubenstein. Calgary Jewish Federation reaches into our own community, and we also reach out to other national and faith communities, including Calgary's Polish community. I want to thank the Canadian Polish Congress Alberta branch, the Polish Combatants Association in Canada, Calgary branch number 18, and the Calgary branch, and the Consulate of the Republic of Poland for joining us as sponsors of tonight's event, which is entitled "The Whole World is a Narrow Bridge." The author of this statement, the great Hasidic Rabbi Nachman of Wrocław, who lived in the 18th and early 19th centuries, followed that with this statement. But the main thing to recall is to have no fear at all. I'm now delighted to introduce Tony Muszynski, Vice President of the Polish Canadian Congress, to bring greetings. Tony is an immigration lawyer, and Tony and I have known each other since we were both young lawyers starting out in Calgary. And we've been reminiscing about that already today. Tony has been extraordinarily active on behalf of the Polish community on a number of fronts, both locally and nationally. Perhaps most notably, he founded Poland in the Rockies in 2004 and has been its director ever since. Tony, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. It's an honor to be here this evening. Very much appreciate the opportunity for the Polish and Jewish communities in Calgary to get a chance to have a dialogue, and above all, I'd like to first of all also thank Judy Shapiro, who I believe was the moving force behind this. Judy is the Associate Executive Director of the Calgary Jewish Federation, and she has worked with the Polish Canadian Association of Calgary in the past on a few projects. So thank you very much, Judy. Eli, you are going to be introduced again in a moment, so I would like, however, to take a few moments to basically confirm that above all, Eli is an educator and a master storyteller. The two go together because really storytelling is education with a human face. Eli collects stories. He celebrates his own heritage through stories, and he learns about others by seeking out their stories. I don't want to take too much time here tonight, but I would like to take this opportunity to tell you briefly about what happened to Polish stories and why they didn't surface for so long. It is normal to talk in the West about the war with Germany. Few people know anything about Russian or the Soviet role other than they were allies and they liberated Europe. Well, yes and no. Poland was attacked both by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in September of 1939. Both were determined to erase Poland off of the map of Europe. The Germans also wanted to kill all Poles other than a few who would be kept as slaves, and the Soviets planned to destroy all Poles with any leadership potential. It is this unholy alliance, and it was a signed, formal alliance, that first unleashed the most brutal occupation in World War II Europe, and subsequently kept Poland encircled, cut off from all possibility of outside help. In June of 1941, Hitler turned on Stalin, who, unprepared to fight this powerful enemy, was forced into an alliance with the hated West. He turned this to his long-term advantage, but the first nation to resist Hitler, Poland, was betrayed in the end. Having fought with the largest resistance anywhere in the West turned them over to Stalin, and thus Stalin achieved what our allies, what he had failed to do with Nazi Germany. The Soviets imposed a communist regime in Poland that took orders from Moscow and therein lies the tale of what happened to Polish stories, because quite simply, they were suppressed. It is not my intention to go into these stories now, but I want you to know how they got suppressed. A few examples will suffice. One of the most painful is the murder of Polish reserve officers by the Soviet NKVD, Stalin Security Police. 22,000 men executed in a crime now known as Katyn. Despite evidence proving their guilt, the Soviets denied the crime, and Poland's other allies went along with that. When the Soviets realized they could not charge Germany with the crime at Nuremberg because it would only reveal their own guilt, the Allies agreed to simply overlook the crime. At the same time, no mention of the hundreds of thousands of Poles who were deported to the Gulag was permitted. In Soviet-controlled Poland, this silence was imposed right up until 1989. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944, when the Polish resistance fought the German army for 2 months, it did so under the watchful eyes of their Soviet so-called allies, whose armies stopped on the opposite side of the Vistula River and waited for the Nazis to destroy the Poles and their capital city so they could impose their own rule more easily. Once Soviet rule was established, the arrest, deportation, and execution of former resistance fighters began and lasted until Stalin's death. Almost 10% of the Polish population was arrested in these years, and tens of thousands were killed. At the same time, all of Poland's wartime resistance was branded as fascist and as collaborationist. Poland's Western allies did not protest. True, the first post-war American ambassador, Arthur Bliss Lane, resigned in protest and wrote a book entitled "I Saw Poland Betrayed." His resignation was accepted, the book was ignored. Neither Britain nor America wanted to acknowledge what happened to their first and most faithful ally, Poland, and that it happened with their acquiescence. Recently, documents by both the British and the American governments reveal that this issue continued to be knowingly suppressed. Polish exiles, those Allied soldiers who had fought with Britain and Canada and found themselves in the West after the war, some of them in Calgary, could not return to their homes without risking their lives. They could remain in the West, but they were warned that they were not to discuss their experience with the Soviet Union. As a result, for several decades, Polish immigrants to Canada and elsewhere did not tell their stories for fear of the authorities, but even more out of fear for their families back in Poland. In Poland, under Soviet control, this ban on history stayed in effect right up until 1989, when Solidarity finally defeated the communist regime. This should have immediately have lifted the curtain in the West as well, but restoring history after it has been trashed is difficult, rather like restoring a good reputation after that reputation has been falsely ruined. So Poles have had a late start and a difficult start. Many people do not like to give up long-held views, and many more are not interested in revisiting a war of so long ago, a big war, true, but one that has been followed by many other wars. It is now our responsibility as a Polish-Canadian community to tell our Polish stories, because not only do many of our children not know them, but it is essentially a matter of truth and justice. There were millions of stories. It's hard to know where to start. Perhaps everyone should begin by first understanding that unlike any other country in the war, only Poland was attacked simultaneously by the two most brutal and most powerful tyrannies in history, and then cut off by them from any outside help during the entire course of the war. At the same time, Polish forces fought with the Allies on every front, liberated others, but could not themselves return home. This is the tragic context, and this context unfolded millions of tragic individual stories, as well as two different outcomes for two of Poland's nations, virtually severing the 1,000-year bond between Poles and Jews. I hope that as two communities who hold education in great esteem, that we will learn about one another and build the bridge to better understanding. Thank you.
Canada. Over the past 24 years, March to Live in Canada has taken teenagers from across Canada on a journey through Poland, where they mark Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, with a march from Auschwitz to Birkenau in the company of thousands of other teens from around the world. While the main purpose of the trip is to honor the millions of people who perished in the Holocaust, great care is taken to emphasize the richness of Jewish life in Poland prior to the Holocaust, to encourage dialogue between the marchers and contemporary Poles, and to honor the courageous Poles who saved Jewish lives and have been recognized by the State of Israel as righteous among the nations. It is important that such dialogue and bridge building take place in Poland, and it is important that we promote it right here in Calgary as well. When we reach out to one another, our fears lessen and we are more likely to help each other across that narrow bridge toward mutual understanding and friendship. There is no better person to guide us than Eli Rubenstein, an educator, spiritual leader, and storyteller extraordinaire, who is devoted to building meaningful relationships between our communities. Thank you again, everyone, for taking part in this evening, and please join me in welcoming Eli Rubenstein.
Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful introductions. I want to thank Adam Singer again, President of the Federation, and Tony Muszynski, your title is Vice President of the Canadian Polish Congress, and to recognize the presence of Ziggy Podolski, who is a Consul General, Honorary Consul General for Poland here in Calgary. A big hand. And, I want to show you a clip of a video in a moment, but after that I'm going to speak, and for those people who are concerned, the story about the rabbi who was giving a sermon, and he's going on and on and on. Finally a man walks out, and the rabbi says, "Stop, where are you going?" The man says, "I'm going to get a haircut." The rabbi says, "A haircut? You couldn't get it before the sermon?" The man said, "I didn't need it before the sermon." No one's going to need a haircut here this evening. I'm not going to speak for that long. We promised to finish by 8:30 as I committed to Judy. But before I begin to even give my formal remarks, I want to show you a short clip of a film I'm sure nobody here has ever seen, very, very powerful. It's called Wanda's Lists.
מה אני יודעת על עצמי? מעט מאוד. מעט מאוד. מבחינה רסמית, כשאני הגעתי לארץ בעלייה ד', שזו הייתה עלייה שילדים הוצמדו למבוגרים לצורך הרישיונות עלייה, סרטיפיקטים, ועליתי עם יהודי שנקרא שמואל גולדשטיין.
וההופעה של לינה, אז אולי באמת צריך להבין בניסים.
Isn't that a beautiful piece?
Yes.
Did everyone ever understand the story? Basically, there was a program after communism fell. Israel television and Polish television got together, and all these kids who had no idea who they were, had no idea what their identity was, got together, and the videos of their stories are put on Polish television, and then people from Polish television watched to see if they could identify the people in the story, and these people saw, Antonina Lira saw the story of Mati Greenberg and was able to tell him who he was. And she was the one that couldn't save him. She put him on a train, somebody else found him and took him to the bakery. So it's a beautiful, beautiful story. And the entire film is full of beautiful stories like that. That's just his story. And I told that story because I know Antonina Lira's granddaughter, excuse me, Matilda, was a friend of mine, and because of that I became familiar with the story. But the rest of the film, it's an hour and a half, is full of these beautiful stories of people reuniting with people who saved their lives. So I wanted to start off with that little clip because my goal here this evening is peace and harmony and unity among all people. And if you look at the faiths that are represented here tonight, the Jewish faith and the Catholic faith, but all faiths, but specifically tonight, if you look at our central religious texts, they all teach us the same thing: to love each other and to live in peace with each other. And I wanted to start off with that example to set the tone for the evening. With that in mind, I'd like you all join in for the singing of Hina Motoma Manai in English. How good and sweet it is when we dwell together in harmony. Please join us. was playing guitar in Bar Mitzvah a year ago, and Geddy Lee, the bass guitar player for Rush, was in the audience, and after the service he came over and said, Rabbi, I don't try to give sermons, why do you try to play the guitar? He didn't say that, but he was thinking that, I'm sure. So, do I need the microphone? Or?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I'll speak with the microphone. So, the whole world is a narrow bridge, building the relationship between Poles and Jews in the 21st century. How am I going to do that this evening? There are many ways, but as you heard earlier, my prime passion and my way of conveying messages is through stories. So I want to share with you some of the stories that I think represent the best of our traditions, the best of our past together, so these could be the example to guide the way for us toward the future. And I want to go back to the story of Joseph and his brothers in the Bible. You all know the story. There's a tremendous rivalry between Joseph and his brothers. They're jealous of him. They're jealous of his multicolored coat. They're jealous of the fact that he's his father's favorite. And so at some point in time, the brothers actually plot to kill him. And the Bible says, the Torah says, Vayiru oto merachok, and Joseph's brothers saw him from afar, and they plotted to kill him. That's what the text says. And Rabbi Yitzchak Avorki, who comes from Poland, that's where he emanates from, says the following. That phrase is not there by accident. In other words, those two phrases, and Joseph's brothers saw him from afar and plotted to kill him, are intricately connected. That means the reason why Joseph's brothers plotted to kill him was because they saw him from afar. In other words, what's the problem in our world? The problem is that when we see people from afar and don't draw them close, we create all sorts of stereotypes and generalizations and false assumptions about them, which is what Joseph's brothers did. They refused to understand him, to draw him close, to try to get to know him, and they created all sorts of stories about him and tried to do harm to him. And so the key to humanity's forward-moving progress is to break down the barriers, to stop seeing each other from afar and getting to know each other. I saw this firsthand in the 1990s when we had a dialogue session between Poles and Jews. And it was university students, and a young girl from McGill, she was in her early 20s, got up after she had spent an hour and a half with Polish students, and she stood up and her words were, I came here wanting to hate you, and I cannot do that after this. All I can do is love. After a dialogue session together. So we need to break down those stereotypes and to build bridges between each of our cultures. So I want to start off with another story from the Bible, and then I'm going to move it to the more contemporary setting. Just a few months ago, in our weekly Torah portion of the Jewish community, we read the story of Moses. Moses was thrown into the Nile in a basket by his mother and by his sister. And he's floating down the Nile, and what happens? Who comes across him? Anybody remember? What's that? Right, a princess, okay? The daughter of Pharaoh. She comes across him, and what happens? She sees the baby crying. She looks into his eyes, and she saves his life. Well, what happened? What happened in that moment? What happened in that moment is something that I think Romeo Dallaire says so eloquently in one of his books. He says when he was in Rwanda, we all know who Romeo Dallaire is, the person, one of the only people in the world who tried to stop the Rwanda genocide. He was in a village, the entire village was massacred. He comes across a child, it's the only survivor of the village, and he's holding the child in his arms, and he's asking himself, what am I doing here? Thousands of miles away from home, different culture, different people. And all of a sudden he looks into the child's eyes. And what does he see? The same eyes as his children at home, wanting love, wanting affection, wanting protection. And that's when Romeo Dallaire said, I realized no human is more human than any other human. No human is more human than any other human. And that's what happened to the daughter of Pharaoh. She looked into the eyes of the child and said, how can I turn this child away? She saved the child. She adopted the child. And that child went on to change the course for the history of humanity. Just saving one child. But that story in Exodus that we just read was played out during the Holocaust thousands and thousands of times. Just like you saw in the film with the little boy on the train. thousands of times. And in Poland, there were over 6,000 righteous among the nations that are identified. Many more. We'll never know half of them. But there are over 6,000 righteous among the nations who did exactly what we're talking about, who recognized the common humanity, that the people in front of them needed to be saved, needed to be protected, even at the risk of their own life. And here's an exact story like that. The story comes from Israel Goodwin. It's a Polish farmer. It's the middle of the night. Him and his wife have barely anything to eat for themselves, and there's a knock on the door. They open the door. It's raining. There's a Jewish man and his family. Please, take us. Just, please, the Nazis are chasing us. We don't know what to do. The Polish farmer doesn't know what to do. They barely have enough food for themselves, and they know the risks. He looks at his wife. You can stay for the night in the barn. That's all. First thing in the morning, you must leave. That's all I can offer you. The morning comes. The Jewish man and his family are getting ready to go. And the Polish farmer comes in and says, I'm sorry. We've changed our minds. We can't turn you away. We know the consequences. You will stay. It's not safe for you to go. You will only go when it's safe to leave. And so the Jewish family stayed. And over the next few months, they actually become quite close friends. Until one day, the Jewish man discovers something terrible. In the neighboring Polish village, a Polish family was caught saving Jews. And of course, they executed the Jews. And of course, they executed the parents, but they even executed the children. And as many of you know, they would often take the entire family and hang them in the streets with signs saying, this is what we do to people who save Jews. My friend Anita Eckstein from Toronto, who was originally from the Lviv area, was saved by Polish righteous among the nations, and she saw that as a 7-year-old girl in the streets, people being hung for saving Jews. The Jewish family finds this out. We can't stay. We can't stay any longer. If what these people have done to us, to possibly risk their lives in such a fashion and their families' lives, we are leaving. And as they're packing their bags, the Polish farmer walks in. What are you doing? We've decided to leave. Why? Because we found what happened in the neighboring village. And after you've been so good to us, how can we possibly repay you by risking your family's life? It's too terrible to even think about it. And for the first time, the Polish farmer became angry. And he looked at the Jewish man and said, put down your bags. Listen to me carefully. Put down your bags. Because what happens to you happens to us. What happens to you happens to us. And he saved our lives. Isn't that a beautiful story? Thank you. That's right. And I share that story with you because for me it's such a beautiful story because it represents the nobility of both of our traditions. If you look at both sides in that story, each one is trying to save the other person's life, and each one is risking their lives to save the other person's life. I think that represents the best of our traditions, and it's one of the most amazing examples that we can follow. My friend Max Eisen comes from Moldova, Czechoslovakia. And Max was a teenager, Passover 1944, singing songs of freedom at the Passover Seder until the gendarmes kicked in the door and dragged him and his family to the cattle cars. And Max says, for one moment, we were free. Next moment, every single human right was stripped from us. And Max remembers his Alsatian barking. His Alsatian was a dog called Farkas, which means wolf in Hungarian. Who knows what an Alsatian is, by the way, the other term for an Alsatian? German Shepherd. Max will not call it a German Shepherd, as you can figure out why. And he remembers his loyal dog barking the entire time as he was being dragged out of his home. Max ends up in Auschwitz-Birkenau. He's just a teenager. His entire family is murdered in the Holocaust. And at one point, a Nazi guard beats him for a moment of inattention to the point of death.
He's dragged unconscious into the infirmary, where a Polish doctor by the name of Tadeusz Orzeszko takes pity on him, decides to nurse him back to health, and he becomes his assistant, his intern in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Max didn't realize this, but Tadeusz Orzeszko was actually working for the Polish underground in Auschwitz. Auschwitz is evacuated by the Nazis. Max is on a death march, doesn't know what happens to Tadeusz Orzeszko. But he ends up in a town called Pilsen. Anybody ever heard of Pilsen, Czechoslovakia? Pilsen beer? And at this point in time, Max is convinced there's not a single decent person left in the world. He's seen so much hate and so much brutality. He's seen fellow prisoners die, and someone just scoops up the hat or the cap because they're trying to stay alive themselves. And he's in the town of Pilsen, and they're in a cattle car, which is really for coal, which has no cover to it, and it's morning and it's freezing. It's the middle of winter. If you touch the steel on the sides of the cattle car, there's no top. Your hands would freeze to the steel. And all of a sudden, he sees Czech citizens gathering at the top of the bridge, and they have baskets of bread, and they start throwing the bread below. And Max had no chance of getting the bread. He was too far down the line. And all of a sudden the Nazis come, what's going on here? Stop, these are Jews. And the Czechs keep throwing the bread. The Nazis say, well, shoot. They keep throwing it, but they start shooting. The Czechs flee. And Max says that was the most important moment of his life, because he realized there were still decent people left in the world. There was a hand reaching out to him. He had no chance of getting the bread, but that act showed him there were still decent people left in the world. So Max survives the Holocaust. He was liberated by American soldiers. In fact, African-American soldiers. One of them was Johnny Stevens, who he's reunited with later on after the war. And Max has come with us on the March of Living a number of times. And he always wondered what happened to Dr. Tadeusz Orzeszko. So a couple of years ago, we contacted Piotr Muszynski, the director of the Auschwitz Museum, and he tracked down the testimony of Dr. Orzeszko. It turned out, as we found out, he was a member of the resistance. And then he died. He was a surgeon. I believe he died in Rotterdam in the 1970s. But we were able to find his family members. His son was an admiral, and his other son was a grandson was a diplomat in Italy. And the next time Max went back to Poland, he met them, and he told them the story about their father in Auschwitz, or now their grandfather, and how he had saved his life. And they were totally moved. They knew nothing about this story. And Max was finally able to say thank you. And then last year, March 15th, 2011, it's Max's birthday. He was turning 82. He gets a phone call. It's Jan Orzeszko from Italy. Max, it's Jan calling. What are you calling for? Calling to wish you a happy birthday. It's your 82nd birthday. Max says, well, not really. What do you mean? It's my 28th birthday. We usually read from right to left. So then Max says, but thank you for calling, but what caused you to call me? And Jan said, I'm calling you because we're all family now. We're all family. And Max started to cry. Isn't that a beautiful story? Zbigniew Menkowski, one of the righteous among the nations that we have met on our trips when we go to Poland. He tells the following story. He was a little child on the outskirts of Warsaw, and all of a sudden 2 pails appear on his porch. And then in the distance, he sees 2 little children, 2 figures, 2 scrawny little children waiting behind the bushes. He says, Mother, what is this? What are these pails for? Who are those children? Anybody guess? These were children who had smuggled themselves out of the Warsaw Ghetto and were looking for food to take back to their families. Because parents couldn't get out, they were too big. They were risking their lives to get food for themselves and their families. But we had very little food today, as Zbigniew said. But my mother did anyways what she should have done. She filled one with bread and potatoes, the other with some soup. She put it back on the porch. And I waited. And these two little figures came, grabbed the food, and even though they are on the verge of starving to death, they did not eat the food. They first took it back to the ghetto and shared it with their family. And Zbigniew said that this went on for months. Every day, these two children came. We looked at each other, we never said a word. But it was like we had this secret, silent friendship. They're almost my best friends. Every day. Until one day, they never came. Because that was a day when the Warsaw Ghetto went up in flames. And I saw pages with strange writing. It was Hebrew writing of holy books. The sky was full of ash. I never saw them again. When Mr. Mankowski told us the story, he took out of his pocket his medal. You see this medal? I was given this medal by Yad Vashem for being one of the righteous among the nations. You know, most people get medals for taking life, but my family and I, we received a medal for saving life. But you know something? When I received this medal, I was very honored to receive it. And I was receiving it on behalf of myself and my family. But mostly, I was thinking about those two little children, my best friends, and the heroism that they did, and their courage and their bravery. And when I received the medal, I was thinking about them, because they were heroes too. Another beautiful story, I think. So now I want to shift a little bit and tell you about one of my personal heroes, Janusz Korczak. I don't think I have to tell people who Janusz Korczak was. Excuse me? Pediatrician and pedagogue and hero for children's rights. He was born in Warsaw. His original name was Henryk Goldschmidt. And from a very young age, he understood that the world was not fair to children. In one of the sort of the fictionalized stories that's based on a real event, Janusz Korczak looks out the window and he sees the Rathmagans playing in the street. He wants to join them, but he's a little bit upper crust. He's not allowed to. He feels trapped. Then he looks at his bird cage and he says to his bird, "You're trapped and I'm trapped. We're in the same boat, but you know what? I can rescue you." Takes the bird out of the cage to set it free, and he realizes the bird's dead. So he decides he's going to bury the bird. He's going down the stairs. His governess catches him and says, "What are you doing?" "I'm going to bury my bird," with tears in his eyes, he said. "You're burying a bird? What's wrong with you? You don't bury birds. They're a different species than human beings. Throw it in the garbage, foolish little child." And Korczak said, I realized at that time, it wasn't animals and people that were different species. It was children and adults that just don't understand this. And he dedicated the rest of his life to fighting for children's rights. When he was about 9 years old, he was crossing a bridge. He looked below the bridge and he sees an insect. Perhaps it was a butterfly drowning. Should I save the butterfly? But I'm wearing nice new shoes and new pants, but the butterfly's drowning. And he said to himself, if I don't act now, when I grow older, will I act to save a human being? So he jumps into the water, scoops up the butterfly, blows on his wings, and says to the butterfly, "Be free. Go off and discover the world." Korczak said, I was never happier than at that moment. So as you know, he becomes a doctor, and he founds 2 orphanages in Warsaw. And the orphanages were run like democracies. The children decided on all the policies. The children voted on the policies. And they punished people. If you did something wrong, the children were the people who decided what the punishment was. In fact, there's a story, Janusz Korczak had a rule that the children passed, no sliding down the banisters. And kids kept breaking the rules. So finally Korczak said, I'm going to try this myself. He slides down the banister, at the bottom, there's a kid looking at him. Don't worry, Dr. Korczak, I won't say a word. Korczak said, no, put me on trial just like anybody else. He was put on trial. The orchestra in Warsaw, the conductor comes to Korczak and says, "Your orphans, they look so sad. They look so forlorn. Let me play some beautiful music for them. Let me bring some of my musicians. We'll just really good music for them." So Korczak says, "Great idea." The musicians come, and they start playing music for the orphans. Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, and with no insult to the people who love Chopin and Mozart and Beethoven, the kids are completely bored. After about half an hour, they're making such a ruckus. The conductor throws down his baton and goes over to Korczak and says, "What is wrong with your children that they can't sit still for the beautiful music my musicians are playing? Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart." And Korczak looks at the conductor and says, "What is wrong with you that you chose to play music that my children couldn't sit still for?" I'm not sure if the conductor had an answer for that. Always empowering children, always. Korczak basically said that children are not half adults. They're full human beings that deserve to be given the chance to reach their potential at the time that they're living. Don't need to wait for the next generation. Let them fly now. The kibbutz in Farod, which Korczak visited in Palestine in the 1930s twice, he encouraged children to learn to fly kites, because when you flew a kite, you felt that you can touch the sky. You can touch infinity. Every child, he felt, should learn to fly a kite. And to this day, there's a kite flying festival in Korczak's honor and memory in Farod. So many more stories I could tell about Janusz Korczak. But Janusz Korczak had one rule that he almost never broke. And the rule was, you always told the truth to children. You never lied to children. But Korczak broke that rule. When did he break the rule? In August of 1942. As you know, Janusz Korczak was a hero to Poles and Jews. He had many opportunities to escape, but he refused to abandon his orphans. The doctor doesn't leave a sick child. I will not leave my children. I will not abandon them. And the order came for Korczak and his orphans to report to the Umschlagplatz in Warsaw. Korczak went to the children and said, "We're going on a picnic. Take your best clothing and your beautiful dolls that were given as gifts to the orphans, and the green flag which symbolizes youth and opportunity and growth, and we're going to march to the sun. We're going on a great picnic." And of course, they marched to the Umschlagplatz. One of the people who saw them was Irina Sandler, a woman who ended up saving thousands and thousands of children. And one of the reasons she did it is because she saw what was happening to Korczak and the orphans. And Korczak and his orphans, his 200 orphans, arrived in Treblinka, where he and close to 900,000 almost all Jews were murdered. And today, if you go to Treblinka, what do you see? 17,000 stones with the names of the Jewish communities wiped out in the Holocaust, but the name of only one person, Janusz Korczak and the children. And that was the only time that he lied to children that I know of.
That was in
Treblinka, yes, Treblinka. I want to share with you one last story, not about Janusz Korczak, but written by Janusz Korczak. Almost no one here has heard this story, because it has not been published in English except in the Mark's Living Diary, and it's called The Scar. And basically, the setting of the story is a Polish teacher is teaching in a school, and it's her first day. She's got beautiful long hair, but she knows it's her first day. The children are going to test her. They're going to try to push her limits and push her boundaries. Not that I ever would have done it when I was that age. And so, first day of school, things seem to be going okay. But little Jacek in the front row is starting to snivel. And she can see that he's holding back tears. There's something bothering him. And Jacek himself knows he's got to hold back tears, because if he doesn't, that's it. If he starts to cry, he'll never grow into a man. That's what he's been told in the schoolyard. If you cry, you can never be a man. But then the tears come. He can't stop himself from crying. "What's wrong, little boy?" the teacher says. And he can't answer, but the other kids in the class do. He's crying because he's sitting next to a Jew. That's why he's crying. He's sitting next to little Moishi. So the teacher says, "Excuse me? Don't talk like that." "Oh, we'll talk like that. We don't want Moishi here. He smells some herring. We'll drive him from the school." The teacher says, "Excuse me. You will do no such thing. You will drive nobody from this school. Now listen to the story I have to tell you about the scar on the back of my head. And she picks up her long, beautiful hair and turns around and shows them the scar on the back of her head. What happened? Who did that to you? Was it a horse? Did a horse kick you? No, it wasn't a horse. It was ignorant, malicious people. Well, what happened? Sit down and I will tell you. When I was a little girl, I grew up in a part of Poland that was mostly German. And when it was my first day to go to school, I was really excited because I wanted to learn. But as my mother was bundling me up to go to school, she started to cry. I said, "Mother, why are you crying?" I didn't know, but I soon found out. Because as soon as I arrived at the school, almost all the kids picked on me and made fun of me. They called me names. They said my father was a drunkard. My father had died a year before, but never touched alcohol in his life. It was very bad for me in that Polish school. But what about the scar? One moment. And only 3 girls took my side. And you know what? When those 3 girls took my side, they asked, "Oh, how much did she pay you to be on her side?" It was very bad for me in that school. So how about the scar? Well, one day the following happened. And all of a sudden, the bell rang. What about the scar? No, I'm sorry. The class is over. I can't continue the story. But what about the scar? She looked at the children and said, "It was a long time ago. The scar on the back of my head has long since healed. But the scar on my heart, on my soul, is always with me, every day. Please, children, I beg of you, don't let anybody leave this school with such a scar on their heart or on their soul." The Scar by Janusz Korczak. Beautiful story as well, I think. Now, when you hear the story, you ask yourself, so there's German students, German children being prejudiced against Polish children, and Polish children being prejudiced against Jewish children. Is that where it ends? Of course not. Korczak wasn't saying that it's only German children who are prejudiced against Polish children. No, prejudice exists everywhere in the world. This is a plea for universal peace and tolerance and acceptance. And if anybody walks away from the story saying, "Oh, this is an anti-Polish story," you're missing the point of the story. This is an anti-racism story. And I will give you the postscript to the story to prove it to you. Because about 10 years ago, I was in Winnipeg telling stories to children. Probably, I would say grade 5 to 8, the Joseph Muszynski School in Winnipeg. And as I was telling the stories, there was one girl who was the brightest kid of the bunch. There were 200 kids, and after every story, this girl knew every answer, had every great question, and she was like the brightest kid in the class. Obviously, not maybe in the school. And I told that story in the scar, about 9 or 10 other stories. The storytelling session is finished. I go into the schoolyard. I'm waiting for my cab to pick me up. Not a lot of fun in the middle of winter waiting for a cab to pick you up in Winnipeg. I knew I was in Winnipeg yesterday because I went to the front desk and I said, "What's the temperature outside?" And the guy said, "Oh, it's only 17 below zero." I knew I was in Winnipeg. So, and this little girl comes over to me. She says, "I really enjoyed your stories." I said, "Oh, thank you. This is a Jewish school." And I said, "What was your favorite story?" She says, "The Scar by Janusz Korczak." And I said to her, "Why?" She says, "Because that story is about me." I said, "What do you mean, about you?" She says, "Yeah, my family and I would just arrived from Russia last year, and the people in school treat me really badly. And they pick on me, and they make fun of me, they call me names. So you told me that story, I realized you were telling the story about me. And my heart almost broke, because this is the brightest kid, yet look at the way she's being treated. And I told her, you know what, eventually, it'll take time, but to realize how special you are. And I just found out, when I told the story in Winnipeg again a couple of days ago, that she went on, graduated, brilliant woman. She's in Edmonton practicing as a doctor, every Jewish parent's dream. Some Polish parents, I'm sure, as well. But she did overcome that. But here I am at a Winnipeg school telling the story, and Jewish children, the problem of racism is universal. It's a problem we all have to address, and Korczak was making that appeal. So why was I telling you these stories about Janusz Korczak? Because as important as it is to talk about the way Janusz Korczak perished, we need to talk about the values he stood for. And he stood for humanity, he stood for compassion, he stood for tolerance, he stood for peace. And the best way we, Jews of Polish descent, and Catholics of Polish descent, honor his memory is by perpetuating his values and building the kind of world that he would have been proud of. So I'm coming to the conclusion of my presentation, and I want to share with you now a little bit of my own personal story. My ancestral roots are in a place in Poland called Tarlow, T-A-R-L-O-W, or pronounced a little bit better, Tarłów. Sound a bit better? Tarłów, but it's spelled T-A-R-L-O-W. Okay, dziękuję bardzo. Tarłów, okay, which is near Ożaro, O-Z-A-R-O-W, or pronounced in English Ożewa, which is near Apt, or Opatu, which is near Opatu, and which is near Lublin, or Lublin, okay? Same general area. So I went back last fall because the cemetery in this town was being rededicated. The Jewish cemetery was being rededicated. And before I went back, I was thinking of the following passage from Ecclesiastes. And when I read this to you, you'll realize later on in the story why I've read it to you. It says in Ecclesiastes, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. So I went back to the town. Now part of the story has some sad aspects to it. Not everybody acted as nobly as they should have. And yet at the same time, there were some noble acts which you're going to come across in a moment. So I went back to the town. And I discovered the following. Virtually all the Jews in Tarłów were massacred during the Holocaust by the Nazis. They also desecrated the cemetery. But sadly, after the war, the rest of the cemetery was carted off by the local residents and used for local construction projects. Very impoverished, perhaps they had no choice. But by the time 2000 rolled around, there was 1/2 a tombstone left in the cemetery. But this doctor, Dr. Jan Kurlio, in the year 2000 decided to change that. And he went from door to door, trying to find as many tombstones as he could to replace, or at least to restore at least a few of them to the cemetery. And that's why we all gathered there. We all come around for the restoration of the cemetery where my great-grandfather was probably buried, in the town where my grandfather came. The first thing I did, I went to the synagogue. And the synagogue in Tarłów, no roof, the roof is blown off. All the windows are gone, it's like gaping, empty eyes, empty sockets. And the entire ground is overrun by brush. And I thought, this is where my grandfather and great-grandfather prayed. And now, all that's praying is trees moving in the wind. And I felt what the theologians call the presence of the absence. And then I went to the dedication of the cemetery. And I met Dr. Jan Kurlio. And there were so many beautiful moments in that dedication. There were old women coming over talking about their childhood Jewish friends and how much they meant to them. And a little girl came over to me because I was speaking. She said, "Where are the Jewish children my age?" I didn't want to say the Nazis had murdered them all, but it was so touching that she said that. And the stories that people were reminiscing about their Jewish friends and neighbors before the war were just beautiful and touching and all spontaneous. And then I spent time with Dr. Jan Curlio. And I asked him, why did you do what you did? And he said, what happened was, it was All Saints Day in 2000, November 2000. And what's the custom, the Polish custom on All Saints Day? You go to the cemetery, you clean off the stones, you put memorial candles. And I asked the people in town, where's the Jewish cemetery? So there's nothing left. And so, I felt bad about that. I'm a doctor. I heal people. I felt I had to heal the wounds of history. So I decided right there and then to go and try to restore the Jewish cemetery. And I went from door to door, knocking on people's doors, asking them if they have any traces, any bits of stone, whatever they had. And that's why we have all these stones here today. And as he was saying that, a young woman came up and said, Dr. Curlio, I found a Jewish matzeva, a Jewish tombstone in my barn. I'm going to bring it to you next week. And it was just so inspiring to see this person do what he was doing. It was so touching. He was so humble. He was so good about it. And I learned a couple of things from it. I learned that it's never too late to try to repair the wrongs of the past. I learned that the power of example is incredible. Here was one person doing something, and all of a sudden so many people came forward. One person doing a good deed inspires so many other people. And I also learned the power of building bridges. Because I asked Dr. Curlio, I asked him, how do you feel? All these people have gathered from around the world, from Canada, the United States, and Israel, because you put all your effort to gather these stones together. How do you feel? And he answered me, but I'll tell the answer in one moment. A little story. This carpenter comes into a village, and he sees an angry man standing at the side of his property. Please, come here. What is it? You see that property there, and you see the moat between the two of us? My brother built a moat because he's angry at me, but I'm going to get back at him. I want you, because you're a carpenter, to build the tallest possible wall so I'll never have to see his face again. Can you do that in a month? No problem, the carpenter says. Brother goes off on a journey. He comes back a month later, and from the distance, it doesn't look like it's exactly a wall. It looks like it's, as he comes closer, it looks like it's a, anybody want to guess? Title of our lecture, it's a bridge. Very good. So what's this? As he comes closer, he sees his brother on the top of the bridge, waving him over, and the carpenter's standing there too. He's going to have a word with the carpenter, but he goes over to his brother. What's going on? His brother says, let me give you a hug. All these years, I didn't realize how much you loved me and cared for me. Please, let's reconcile. Let's forgive each other. And they hug. And as the carpenter's about to leave, the brother says, hey, stop. Stop, excuse me. You're such a good carpenter. This is a magnificent bridge. I have other jobs for you to do. The carpenter said, sorry, I can't stay. I have more bridges to build. And a beautiful story, more bridges to build. So, I looked at Jan Curlio, and I said to him, how do you feel with all these people here? Tranquility. So, I want to almost close with a couple of quotes. Before I do that, I want to ask you to join with me a song by Nachman of Breslov, which was the title of the lecture, The Whole World is a Narrow Bridge. And the words in English are, the whole wide world is a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is to have no fear at all. So please join me for this closing.
Not optional. Let's try it again. The whole wide world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge, a very narrow close with a number of quotes that are very inspirational to me. By the way, I had 4 pages of stories here, so you got off light because there's about 2 more hours of good stories. But I think we're going to conclude at this point. We can have this discussion and question and answer afterwards as well. But I want to leave you with 2 quotes from young people who were caught up in Holocaust. And these quotes are inspired by something else that Nachman Breslov said. Nachman Breslov, in addition to saying the whole wide world is a very narrow bridge, the main thing is to have no fear at all, also said, if you believe something can be broken, also believe that it can be fixed. If you believe something can be broken, also believe it can be fixed. And so what we're trying to do with the legacy of the Holocaust is to say this terrible thing happened in the history of the world, but we, through our actions and our example, can try to fix it. So the 2 quotes are one from a Polish girl, Polish Catholic girl, the other one from a Jewish girl, both caught up in the era of the Holocaust. Polish girl was Krystyna Watuska. Do you know Krystyna Watuska? She was a member of the Polish underground. She actually had a Jewish boyfriend, and she was caught, tortured, and guillotined. Caught at age 22, executed at age of 24. And one of the last things she wrote from the prison was a letter, the following words. And I think about her words a lot, almost all the time, because they were so profound and touched me deeply. She said the following: on the day that I die, I want to die for freedom, I want to die for justice, and for all humanity, not just for my Poland. You see, I'm first a human being, and then a Pole. Consciousness of a universal humanity will comfort me. But please don't misunderstand me. It is not that I don't love my country, but I would relinquish my country's objectives if they were also not good for all of humanity. So those words, and especially the words, I am first a human being and then a Pole, are so profound. She was not anti-Polish. She was a Polish patriot. She died for her country. And yet one of her last words were, I am first a human being and then a Pole. And I do want to give credit to Eli Rubenstein, Tony and I's good friends. This comes from her book. This passage comes from her book, and she wrote a book called I'm First a Human Being, based on her life. And those words, I'm first a human being, are so profound because it applies to me as well. I'm first a human being, and then I'm a Jew, and then perhaps I'm a Canadian, and then perhaps I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. Well, not much anymore. Another story. But it's not to say that we shouldn't be proud of our heritage, and proud of our ethnicity, and proud of our religion, and proud of our countries, and proud of being patriots. Of course we should be all those things. But what has to come first is the recognition of our common humanity. Everything else after that, as important as it is secondary. We are all human beings. Krystyna Watuska's words, I'm first a human being, and Roman Delair's words, no human is more human than any other human. Every identity that comes after that, as important as it is, does not rival our own humanity. Very important words for us to think about. And now from Dunya Rosa, who was 12 years old when she wrote in her diary on June 23rd, 1943, hiding in the forest after the murder of her family, these words. And this is what she had to say. Words fail me, but I must write. I must. I want to ask you not to forget the dead. I want to beg you with all my heart that you would establish a memorial to us, a monument that reaches the sky, a mark that will be seen throughout the world, but not a statue of marble, and not a statue of stone, but a statue of good deeds. A statue of good deeds. For I believe, with a full and perfect faith, that only such a monument
monument of good deeds can ensure you and your children a better future, and then the evil that seeks control of the world will not return. Words by Doña Rosa. So this evening, I shared with you a number of stories about nobility, about altruism, about courage, and about bravery. And these stories reflect the best of both of our cultures and our traditions, the most noble aspects of who we strive to be. And so as we move into the future, as our children and grandchildren grow up in the world and assume their rightful place, let these be the stories that we tell them and inspire us to build a better world. Thank you very much. I hope you found these stories inspiring and interesting and worthy of setting an example in your own lives, and they moved you and they touched you as they do for me. However, if you didn't, and you found the session not that inspiring, remember, as Dr. Korczak teaches us, don't blame yourselves, blame me. Thank you again.
Eli, thank you. Dziękuję. Toda rabah. Thank you for your words, which have made us smile and laugh and also cry. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And please leave here.
People have questions.
Does anybody want to ask any questions?
Hi, I have a question just sort of generally speaking about our Polish youth community in Calgary, and I know me and many of my peers, we were born here in Canada, so our experience is very different from, for example, what our parents and grandparents experienced. And
Would you speak on the
sure.
Start again.
Sure. So I'm just speaking from the perspective of myself and my peers born here in Canada, and how our experiences are much different from what our parents and grandparents experienced. I was wondering, what is your advice for helping bridge the gap between sort of the experiences of the older generations with our desire to sort of move forward and progress, and the theme of tonight of, no human is more human than any other human.
Sorry, I forgot to say when the asking questions, it can only be easy questions. I forgot to mention that. That's a difficult question to answer because you want to be true to yourself and authentic to yourself. You also want to honor your parents, and you want to respect their ways and their traditions by being honest to who you are too. And there's a real challenge in ensuring that you honor both. That you honor who you are and your values, and honor your parents' values as well. And my answer to you would be, I think if you look at any tradition, whether it's a Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition or the Polish tradition, you're going to find beautiful, wonderful, incredibly profound things, and you're going to find things that are, as they say in fancy English, right? And my advice to you would be to choose the best things from your traditions that do inspire you, and don't be caught into the box of it's all or nothing. Either I have to do everything or I do nothing. Because there's enough from all of our traditions to inspire us. So that would be one of the advice. The other thing to remember is there's great comfort in connecting to your ancestors. You know, we live in cities of millions of people, and often we feel alone. And why is that? Because we don't have a connection. We're not rooted in anything. So there's great comfort in connecting to your past and your traditions, your ancestors. But try to do it in your own way, in a way that's unique to you and that's meaningful to you, and not simply just doing it as other people did it. I mean, everybody knows the story of the roast, you know. Everybody knows the story, you know, this mother cuts off the end of the roast, you know. Why do you do that? Because my mother did it. Why? Because her mother did it. Why did her mother do it? I don't know. Go ask great-grandma. Great-grandma, why did you cut off the end of the roast? What's the religious tradition behind it? What's the sacred meaning? No, I was in Europe and my pot wasn't big enough, so I cut off my little rose. So the idea would be to find things that are meaningful and wonderful and inspiring, and not necessarily to do everything. But it's a good challenge, it's a good question. We have a saying in Judaism, the question is always better than the answer, and I think that's an example of that.
Any other questions?
Okay, I do want to maybe close with one last little story connected to your question. And this is a story from Gluckel of Hungary. And it's a beautiful story about thinking about what your parents will want you to do the most. There were 3 fledglings that wanted to leave the nest. And the parents decided to give them a test. And by the way, you know, I have a saying, all the stories I tell are true and some of them may have even happened. So it applies to this story. The 3 fledglings wanted to leave the nest. And their first fledgling was given a test. The father takes the fledgling, little bird, on a journey, and the fledgling says, "Can I go? Am I free? 1 second, I have a question for you. We're caught in a bit of a storm, and you know, I'm taking care of you, I'm protecting you. Will you take care of me when I'm older and your mother's older? Because we're not sure about this Canada pension plan thing. The Harper government lately is making some kind of funny noises." So the baby bird says, for sure, for you and Mom, anything. You know, Ritz-Carlton, 7-day room service, manicures, pedicures, whatever you want. iPads, whatever, everything you want, Mom and Dad. It's all for you. It's all to be ready. Fledgling's taken back to the nest. You got to stay a little longer. What did I do wrong? You shouldn't promise things you don't know that you could fulfill. Time for the second bird. Same thing. Big gale force winds. Will you take care of Mother and I when we're older? Second bird says, no, you'll be old and useless. Why should I? You have nothing to offer me. Dumps them back in the nest. What did I say wrong? I said the truth. The truth is, you should help other people, whether or not they can give you something in return. You got to stay in the nest a little longer and take some more lessons. So it's time for the third fledgling. The third fledgling is taken across. And again, gale force winds. Will you take care of Mother and I when we're older and can't take care of ourselves? The third fledgling says, you know, Dad, I don't really know. What do you mean? You see, the problem is, when I'm older, I'm going to have my own little babies to take care of. I don't know if I can take care of you and Mom at the same time. But I promise you 2 things. First of all, I'll do my best. I'll do my best. And secondly, the same kindness, the same compassion, the same love you showed me, I will show to my children. Father bird looked at the bird and said, you are a wise bird. Go ahead and discover the world. And sent the bird off. So the best way of honoring your parents is the way they loved you is to love your own children. Thank you.
So please don't rush away. There's food. Please stay for some conversation and have a bite to eat, and let's get to know each other a bit better tonight.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to have my chair back.
Ale odjebam.